Stuff. In Senator Coons' absence, I'm presiding for the time being, and will proceed with my questions before recognizing the next member. Um, and let me just begin by thanking Senator Coons for holding this hearing on platform transparency, and to all the witnesses for exceptionally detailed testimony. Transparency has been a key piece of the debate over the responsibilities of technology companies and the impact their services have on our democracy and the welfare of our loved ones and our neighbors. Now, as one of the few senators with an engineering background, I believe that policymaking is at its best when we're also armed with research and data. And to that end, I support the calls to enhance platform transparency to better serve the public, users of these services, the company themselves, and lawmakers. We have an important opportunity for real, productive, and effective policymaking. And before I jump into my first statement question, I also want to note that I have the honor of representing the state of California, home to more innovators and executives and investors in technology than any other state in the nation, also home to more consumers of technology and users of platforms than any other state in the nation, and of course, more employees in the sector than any state in the nation. And so my first three questions are a little rapid fire. Mr. Silverman, what state are you from?
California.
Professor Pursley, what state are you from?
California.
Professor Keller, what state are you from?
California.
No disrespect to the other witnesses. Just want to drive home the point. California plays a huge role in this discussion and in the problem solving as well, from all angles. Now, advocates are routinely highlighting the failure of technology companies to moderate content in non-English languages. As Francis Hogan testified at a previous hearing, 87% of all spending combating misinformation on Facebook is spent on English language content, but only 9% of Facebook users are English speakers. That's important data. Other platforms likely have similar disparities, but they haven't publicly disclosed similar information, and I certainly would love to see that data. Professor Keller, in your testimony, you shared that the EU's Digital Service Act requires public transparency reporting around the number of content moderators platforms employ and what their linguistic expertise is. Do you think similar transparency reporting should be considered in the United States?
So I agree with you that the language issue is incredibly important. And I think one of the most important disclosures from my former client, Francis Haugen, was that not only in languages that don't have as many speakers is the content moderation not as good, but also they don't build machine learning systems that are as good as a result. So the problem is just compounded. I do think that attention to additional languages is incredibly important. I mean, unfortunately, it's part of what makes measures of things like prevalence so expensive, because it means that you're deploying people in many languages who need many cultural, contexts to try to extrapolate how much content exists across the platform. But yes, I am in favor of reporting that you described.
And just briefly, is there any other types of information or data that would be helpful in addressing this or other disparities that concern you?
Well, one of the most important things is to see the actual content that platforms took down or left up or demoted. If researchers can't see that, then the platforms are grading their own homework. The researchers can't see if there's a pattern of bias or if they're making mistakes or whatever. This collides with the privacy issues that I identified in my testimony for platforms like Facebook. But certainly for publicly shared content, where the person who posted it hasn't tried to take it down, having an opportunity for third parties to look at what's actually going on in multiple languages, for multiple cultural contexts is really important.
Yeah. Let alone liability, which further speaks to the complexity of the policy here. Now, on a separate note, when legislating on technology-related issues, I think it's important, and I've raised this in the full committee previously, important to not enable or incent politically ambitious government officials with legal authorities who may use our efforts to undermine the ability of platforms to limit the spread of hate speech and election disinformation, just as two examples. Question for Professor Keller again. In your testimony, you cited the Texas Attorney General's ongoing dispute with Twitter as an example of states trying to influence online speech. So, as Congress considers regulating the conduct of tech companies with respect to transparency and competition, what should we know about the battle over online speech regulation and what's taking place in the states?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to appreciate the rash of cases out there, litigation, and state laws, some of which have passed, that have the goal of compelling platforms to carry content that the platforms don't want to, that violates the platform's rules. And this includes, white nationalists saying that they have a right to post white nationalist content on Twitter, and there have been over 70 of these cases. The laws that were passed in Texas and Florida both create these obligations to carry content that violates the platform's rules. And I'm sympathetic in a way. Like, these are the public forums of today. I understand why people are very concerned about being excluded, if they are being excluded. But creating a mechanism for government actors to effectively strong-arm platforms about their policies, which I think is what is going on with the Texas AG investigation, is quite dangerous. And I think this is something to worry about with some competition bills pending that are otherwise, I think, really good ideas. These are, I'm sorry that Senator Klobuchar isn't here to hear me talk about her bill. But they 95% are about saying platforms shouldn't self-preference and promote their own properties over their competitors. And then both her bill and Senator Blumenthal's bill, and he's not here either, both have just a couple of sentences that permit a different category of lawsuit, a lawsuit that's Breitbart saying they should be treated like the Wall Street Journal, for example. And I think it's a very serious change in the law if that comes into effect.
Thank you. Speaking of Texas, Senator Cruz.